So let's get going without further ado. Yanni, welcome again. Thank you again for taking time and doing this with us. Let's start with a brief intro of yourself, like your career. Like how have you seen it shaping up from an IC through manager, and so this the wave that you have had to ride.
So I started my career as an intern while going to college back in like 1996 in Boston. And I was an IC for most of my career. I ended up growing by eventually moving from Boston to Seattle to work for Microsoft, and then eventually down to the Valley, taking a few stops in between. One of my most interesting interview stories is from early in my career when I was interviewing at Microsoft. And I graduated Boston University, and my focus was computer graphics. And there was a bunch of computer graphics people who had happened to have gone to Microsoft, some people from before me, my class, and my current class. And I was super excited to go to Microsoft. So I had my demo all set up. It was like a 3D stereoscopic. You put on the 3D glasses and you could see the spline move. And so I fly out there and I'm very excited. And I interview with Microsoft Money and Encarta. And I go through the interview. I'm excited. I go home. And remember, this is circa what, 98, 99? And I go home. And back then, they didn't send you emails. They didn't call you. They sent you letters. So I get a letter from Microsoft, and the letter says, "Thank you for coming in. I'm sorry, this isn't a fit." And it was I felt terrible. I'm like, come on, what did I do wrong? I'm just not good. I must not be good enough for big tech companies. At the time, I was working for Teradyne, which was a semiconductor test company, and as a software engineer. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm just not good. Then 3 years later, fast forward, and 2003, and there's layoffs and I get laid off, and I go back to try to interview again at Microsoft, and I get in. And later on, I find the person who I'd interviewed with, and I spoke to them about it. And I said, hey, I'm here. Oh yeah, welcome. I'm like, I'm curious, what happened? Because I mean, they want me now and they didn't want me then. He's like, oh yeah, that hiring manager, he didn't really want any more BU graphics people because they kept leaving the team. They didn't want to work on Encarta, like shocker, right? And so the takeaway from this was like, for 3 years, I held this like thing in my mind that I just wasn't good enough for Microsoft or, whatever. And then it turns out the guy just didn't like BU programmers in graphics because they got bored of working on Encarta and wanted to move somewhere else in Microsoft. So anyway, it was a life lesson there. Fast forward, I moved into management when I moved down to the Valley. I did a startup for a bit where I was an IC, and then I moved back to Microsoft working on IPTV stuff. And I started managing then. And I grew through it through a couple different companies afterward, Microsoft to Bloomberg, where I brought up the office, and then to Apple, and now at Google.
Fascinating. So you're at Google right now, and you're leading a few teams for their Germany office.
Not just Germany. So I am the graphics lead for Stadia. And Stadia, there's multi offices, right? There's an office in Waterloo, an office in Mountain View, and here. But Germany is a growth site for Google in general and Stadia in particular. So this is why I'm here.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you, Annie. Very well. Let's start with sort of the heart of the question, which I think everybody, or at least half the audience here seems to have. How do I prepare for an engineering management interview? And as part of that, let's discuss L6, L7, the difference between the two and such, and what are the broad areas that one needs to prepare for, right, when being considered for an engineering management interview. I'm sure you have interviewed at a number of companies. You work at Google right now, but in your journey, you have interviewed at a number of companies as manager, and you received several offers and such. So you generally understand the landscape of management interviews at tier 1 places. So if you could tell us a little bit about how to prepare for it. What are they looking for? What does roughly the process look like? The difference between like a manager and a senior manager. That would be awesome. That would be a great starting point.
Okay. So I guess the first thing I want to say is a lot of what I'm going to tell you isn't secret. A lot of this information you can get by talking to the recruiter, asking them how the process works, asking them what type of questions people ask on the loop, asking who's going to be on the loop so you know approximately how to, at what level to answer questions. And I encourage everybody to do that. What I'll say is for the top tier companies, I would separate them into two categories. There's the 1.0 style tech companies that like are eBay and Microsoft and Apple. And they have a slightly different process than the, let's say 2.0, Facebook, Google, and their offshoots like Uber and Lyft. And so generally for the first set of companies, they recruit for a certain role. And this is the same for IC and as manager. So you're very likely to be going in for a very specific team that you're going to manage versus Facebook and Google style, where you get interviewed by a committee. The committee makes the decision on whether to hire you, and then they do team fit, where you can select which team to join. Now, even in those Facebook, Google style companies, you can be pre-fit. In other words, you can have a particular team in a particular opportunity, but in general, the loop is generic, right? It's not focused on managing that particular team. The layout is usually one coding question, two system design questions, and by system design, it could mean actual back-end system layout, but it could also be product system design. So, you know, what's important in this UI? How would you display the information for this application? So a little bit of product design to see if you have product sense, to see if when you're sitting in a conversation as an engineering manager or leader, you can meaningfully contribute when product is asking for things and make trade-offs. The remaining two interviews are probably the most important, and they're the behavioral ones. So this is where they give you either the what ifs, you know, what if you have an underperforming employee? What if you're behind schedule on your project? Or they ask for a particular situation. So tell me about a time when you had a conflict with a peer, these kind of questions. And they're the ones that I think you should focus on the most, because they are the biggest contributor to the hiring decision. The technical parts are important, especially for the top tier companies, mostly from a credibility perspective. They want you to join and be able to have credibility with senior ICs on the team and other managers. So there's a baseline expectation, but the reality is the coding question is really not, the expectation is not at the level of an equivalently leveled IC. So if you're interviewing as an L6 IC, the level of coding and system design that's expected is higher than interviewing as an L6 manager.
I see. Makes sense. So if we were to summarize one coding question where the expectation is not as much as like an L6 IC, right? It could be like L5, L4 IC, but like not as much in that. That's one. Mm-hmm. Second is a design question, system design or product design. That area needs to be prepared for. And the third is their own stories about how they have led in the past and what are the management philosophies and what are some of the decision making, what decision making that they've done in the past and such. Like so these three seem to be the broad areas of preparation for an engineering manager. Correct.
Yep.
Awesome. And is there a difference between like L6 and L7, like a manager versus senior manager evaluation and interview process at a tier one company?
Yes. So generally there's a role delta. So L6 is generally a manager of ICs, and L7 is generally a manager of managers. So the scope of influence for an L6 is generally anywhere between, let's say, 4 to 12, 15 people. And for an L7, the expectation is a team size of 30 to 50, right? Now, of course, that doesn't mean you necessarily start that way. You might join as an L7 in a growing org, one where they anticipate more growth, and you might start off with just directly managing ICs. But the type of skill they're looking for is somebody who has managed managers as an L7. Yeah.
I see. So I think that's a very interesting, and that's a nice dovetail into very frequently asked question here and even before. Like, if I don't have management experience, right, can I go for a managerial role? And let's start with like a tier one place, right? A good solid tier one place. Can one apply for L6, L7 or manager, senior manager role if they have not had direct management experience? Now, they may have been a technical leader before, influenced the technical design of the product. They may have guided junior people in their technical careers and such, but like they've never had a formal managerial role, right? When you're looking at, or the recruiters are looking at resumes, or you're looking at resumes, or you are interviewing someone for that, like, how would you consider that? Is it a no from the get-go? Is it like, what are the chances of it? Just trying to wrap my head around it.
So the shortest answer would be no, that it's very unlikely. And the logic is the same logic you get even as an IC, which is companies are generally willing to be flexible on things like compensation, or things like working from home one day a week because you just had a kid, or these kind of logistical issues, things that are generally easy for them. And usually they're flexible on this because they want to de-risk the thing they care about, which is the product they're building. So if you are even a strong IC, but perhaps they want somebody who specializes in networking in a particular role, they're going to be less flexible than somebody who's maybe specializes in networking, but is asking for something special, or is maybe not as many years experience, right? So even for ICs, you get this phenomenon where companies want to be really careful that they get the person that they're looking for in terms of fit, and they're usually flexible on these other dimensions. It's the same with management. It's strange to walk in and say, you're going to interview for a team of, let's say, 10 people, and you've never managed people. What you can do, though, in these larger tech companies is you can pick a ladder that has a potential for management. So what do I mean by ladders? At Google, they have this terminology for career ladders. And I think all companies have this. Apple has this, Facebook has this. They might use different names. But the idea is there's a track. And there's one track that's an IC track. So you're an L4 IC, an L5 IC, an L6 IC. And then there's a manager track. Usually it starts at L5. So there's like a junior manager, senior manager. And the thing is, there's some overlap in these tracks. So a manager track is expected that you're primarily managing people and you're less focused on technical areas at Google. And the expectation is you have senior ICs. So as you, as let's say an L7 manager, have an L6 IC or multiple L6 ICs who are focused on the technical verticals. So while you need to be proficient and need to have credibility with them and need to understand what they're doing, you're not expected necessarily to dive into any one of those areas. As a person who's on the IC track, just because you're on the IC track doesn't mean you can't manage people. It just means that that is not necessarily your primary responsibility. And as you go up the IC track, you're expected to lead technically, and in some deep areas, you're also expected to people manage. So while you can be, for example, an L7 or L8 IC at Google, what you frequently find is somebody who's L6, L7, L8 at Google, who's on the IC ladder, also has some reports, but they won't have anywhere near as many reports as somebody who's on the manager ladder. So an L7 manager, like I said, is maybe somewhere 30 to 50 people. An L7 IC might have 5 people as part of trying to execute on a particular technical area. So one path to management is to find a role as, let's say, an L6 IC in a place like Facebook or Google, where there is opportunity to technically lead and then take on some reports as well. So you won't get it going in necessarily if you haven't managed, but that is allowed for that track. So once you're in and you have a track record with the team, if the team is growing, there's potential for you to start managing.
Interesting. Okay, very well. And Yanni, why even become a manager? I think there is this thing about this thing that I see in many students, that I want to become a manager so that I don't know how to code, right? So that I don't have to be technical, right? Like it is sometimes seen subconsciously or consciously seen as an escape route from being an IC and getting to this challenging interviews, right? Would you say that the L6, L7 interviews, especially L6, are any easier than an IC interview at tier 1 places, or not necessarily?
I would say it's not that they're easier. The questions are similar. There is no separate bank of like technical questions for an L6 EM versus an L6 IC if your role in the interview process is, let's say, a coding question. The difference would be that when the committees look at the feedback, because the latter requires more of the behavioral and the leadership aspects, they might emphasize less the results of the coding interview. So you could imagine a case, this is not formulaic, but an example might be somebody who's very strong in behavioral and very strong in general system design, but maybe is a bit weak on coding. Maybe they haven't coded in 5 years or whatever, and they could get some pseudocode on there. They understood they had to loop over an array and do something, but they weren't really able to generate correct code in their language of choice. The committee might look at that and say, you know, we're bringing this person in to manage 30 people. Maybe that's okay. They clearly have the level of system design and product instinct that we're looking for in this type of role. So nominally it's easier, but only because other parts are harder. So if you're good at that, if you're good at these other parts and you can score well in these other dimensions, then by all means, go for that kind of role. But it's not that managing is easy and being IC is hard. It's like being a star basketball player is different than being a star football player. But if you're like, oh, I'm sick of playing football, maybe I'll go give this basketball thing a try. It's not necessarily going to map as the same skill set, the same things that made you successful as an IC won't necessarily map to this other ladder and this other work that you need to do.
All right, makes sense. All right, folks. Again, those who joined late, my name is Soham, and we are and one of the founders of Interview Kickstart. We have Yanni with us. Yanni is a senior manager at Google, senior engineering manager at Google. He's also been with Interview Kickstart for quite some time now. We are talking about engineering management interviews. Right? As you guys know, we run courses to prepare for technical interviews. We run courses to prepare for L3 through L7, right? Sometimes directorial roles as well, L8 as well. But we are very good at preparing for interviews on the technical side as well as behavioral side, coding, system design, algorithms, soft skills, all that. I came from Box, as some of you might know. It was one of the fastest growing SaaS companies in the Valley for a long time. And I happened to be there as director of engineering. And Interview Kickstart has been around for about 6 years now. I started it after left Box. And Yanni's answers to me seem very spot on as well. This is exactly my experience too. At Box also exactly the same thing. We would not interview people without management experience as well. And there is this other myth as well, folks, where sometimes people feel like engineering managers are paid way more than ICs, but Yanni, that's not the case. Yeah, that is generally.
Yeah, generally although compensation differs in any particular ladder, it also differs by job title. So, you know, in these large companies, there's lots of different career paths and lots of different titles. So for example, an in-demand skill set like ML, you might have an L5 ML person whose median comp is significantly higher than an L5 web developer, even though notionally the rubric used to hire and the rubric used to judge talent is the same. So yes, it can differ, and but I think the biggest area of difference is simply a mismatch of supply and demand, right? These top companies want technical managers. They want managers who are technical enough to do well on these coding and system design interviews. Again, not as well as they would expect a comparable IC, but they want enough of that. And they also want the managerial and behavioral, and it's a hard combination to find. So what I would say, if there is a median comp delta, it is usually because they are harder roles to fill, which gives more negotiating power to the person filling them. But it's not necessarily because structurally they're designed to have a higher median comp.
Makes sense. And I have had more than one instances in my past life as well, where I have paid more to people reporting into me, for example. And they were ICs and I was, so to speak, a manager, senior manager, director, and whatnot. I mean, like Yannis said, it's just really the supply and demand, certainly. The other thing which many people ask is how many years of experience is required really to apply to these places? Like, is there like a magical 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and then let me now try and apply to this, or not really?
I would say there's no magical number, but there is an expectation of, I would say, at least a couple years. It's hard to claim a credential when you've been a manager, let's say, for 3 months. To say, well, this place made me a manager for 3 months, you should make me a manager. Again, it kind of goes back to the idea is they want to de-risk the role they're filling. So things that are risky is putting a person in charge, a person to be a leader who is not a very good leader. And the risk of that is high if somebody's been there only 3 months. Versus the alternative where you're in a competitive situation and the thing that will get this person who has scored well on all these leadership is a few more RSUs or working remote, or whatever the delta is. You're much more likely to give the latter than you are to take a risk on the former.
Fascinating. My anecdotal experience as well. We were looking for managers in Box, and incidentally, we would only interview actually only senior managers from outside, and that was simply because what Yannis said, that we wanted to de-risk the role. Like we clearly understood that a wrong manager is like 10 times worse than a wrong IC getting hired in a company. So, and we had made managerial mistakes before. And so we were very, very careful. It was a smaller setup, certainly not as big as Google's, but smaller setup, but still a really high bar. And so we would completely de-risk that position. We would offer a managerial role to someone who has held senior manager roles only before. And we'll still match the comp, but the title would be lower. So in terms of experience, like some experience is required. I think I'm completely with you on that. The other frequently asked question, Annie, is that what if I've been a TPM, like a technical program manager, sometimes product manager, usually program management? Like, can I just move to EM roles? Like, I've been TPM at a tier 2 company, so to speak, outside, and now I want to apply to L6 or L7 at Google, Facebook, at Apple, Amazon, like some of these places. So is that a viable pathway, or it's like,
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things that is hard. It's a hard truth in the Valley, and especially in these matrixed organizations, which is TPM is generally not that strong of a discipline. Like, they generally don't have that much control. And so they tend not to be decision makers. So PM, product management, the people who are deciding what we're going to build, they can have a significant amount of influence. The engineering org can have a significant amount of influence. And TPMs do important work, and they do good work, and they do even senior work, but it's simply not viewed as the most critical part of the organization. So it is you talked about reducing the people's titles. Okay, you're a senior manager somewhere. Well, we'll give you the money and we'll give you a path to get there, but we're not going to give you that recognition right now. It's even harder for TPM because you tend to not have the product influence of the PMs, but you also tend not to have the engineering depth of the engineering managers. So you can bring management if you're a TPM manager, right? So if you're managing TPMs, you can bring that experience, but the expectation will still be there. Because again, in Google, you have, or all these companies, you have the engineering track and you have the PM track, which is separate. And the PM track is totally not technical. Or if it's technical, it's like great that you have technical experience. It'll help you better translate the product needs to what engineering can provide. TPM has some technical, has more technical to it as well than PM, because they're in the day-to-day. But it's a hard sell to say that experience matches the engineering ladder. And a lot of that can be biased, right? I mean, a lot of these things are, again, a form of credentialing. Like in theory, you could do just as well on the interview. So I don't think it's wrong to interview. I don't think it's a problem, but I think especially because in these top tier companies like Google and Facebook, the recruiters have a lot of control over where you're leveled. So the way the process tends to work is they'll pick you out on LinkedIn, they'll pick you out of a hat, however they find you, and they'll look at your resume, they'll look at the companies you're at, and they, especially for lower levels, they have a very clear rubric. It's like number of years or like blah, blah, blah. But at these more senior levels, it's a bit of a judgment call on their part, but they will decide what the loop looks like. And they will decide if you're going for an engineering track or a TPM track or whatever. And you as the interviewee can, of course, express a preference. And the recruiter wants to hire you, but they also want to be cognizant of people's time. And so if the success rate is low for, say, a TPM lead who's managed, let's say, 4 or 5 people to go be an engineering manager, it's just not something they're going to want to do, right? So you have that roadblock. So I would say it is a challenge to switch from TPM to an EM role. It's actually easier to do when you're inside the company because there may be tracks for that. There may be a path if people know you, if people have faith in what you've done and you've actually contributed technically to a significant degree, there might be that kind of opportunity. But from the outside, there's just no way to credential yourself to meet these screens that the recruiters do.
Cool. Yanni, I think there's lots to talk about this. I would say let's switch gears and go to questions. There are like 65 questions at this point, and I know you also have a hard stop at 11. So let's start from the top. I'll keep triaging questions, Yanni, and I'll ask you for that, okay. Folks. Right. Folks, if I do not happen to pay a lot of attention to a question, it is nothing personal. I will do so only if I feel like we have addressed it a little bit in the last 20 minutes that we have been chatting. And then Yanni has a hard stop. I do have a few minutes after that, so I'm happy to continue as well. But let's make the most use of Yanni's time, and I'll just go from question to question. I'll mumble the question, and then if I feel like, yeah, this hasn't been answered yet, I will ask Yanni, and then we'll go from there. There are lots and lots of them. I'll tell you, I'm not going to be able to get through all of them, but again, nothing personal, just being efficient for time. And we can continue a little bit later as well. Okay, I'm an engineering lead, and how can I transfer to become a manager position outside my company? So this is interesting, and I think there are a few of these lingering around as well. Like, how do I become a manager? Like, I understand that I am an IC. I understand I can't apply directly and just magically become a manager. Like, how do I develop my leadership skills, or like how do I transition into management? Like, what are some of the paths forward for me? Like my desire to become a manager, what's the right path forward on this?
Yeah, I would say that the first thing is always to make sure that you actually want to be a manager, right? A lot of people don't necessarily think about the role or everything the role entails. They see what they see. So as an IC, I approach a manager and I see things like, well, they have one-on-ones with me and they do presentations, and you see the outside. I think it's important to make sure you understand what the role entails and what people look for. And what your day-to-day will be like. And the best way to do that is to talk to people who are managers. There should be a lot of opportunities in your company to meet people, to have coffee with them, or virtual coffee as we're doing now, to have mentors. It's a great opportunity to ask them, hey, what's your day like? What's your biggest problem? And see if this is something you want to do. So assuming you've done that and you want to do that, I think, again, your best bet is to grow organically within the organization. So it starts with when you're having career conversations with your manager or your manager's manager in a skip level one-on-one, is to express interest. First key, express interest and talk about why you want to do it. Because again, if I'm listening to somebody, if I'm on the other side of this equation and I hear, I want to be a manager. Okay, great, why? If you have a good response and you have a good understanding of the role and why you want to do it, then I'm inclined to help you. If it's like, well, I don't like coding as much, or you don't have an answer, or it's just people won't want to help you as much. So make sure you've thought it out well, why you want to do this. Second thing I would say is part of being a manager is identifying opportunities within the organization. So do that. Look around your organization, look around what you're doing, and help identify places for you to jump into that role. So if for this person who says, I'm an engineer lead of 10 to 12 projects, and how do I transform them to becoming an engineering manager? Well, I would say 10 to 12 projects is a lot of projects for one person, right? In fact, I don't know how you could be really deep in any one of those projects if you're managing 10 to 12 at a time. I would say if you can identify a small set of projects that are very important to the company or to the team or to the organization, and then you have engineers that you lead technically, right? Then you can have the conversation around, can I be their actual manager, right? So the key is to have a good rapport with these people. So if I am the leader and I go talk to them and I say, hey, do you want to be managed by Soham? Or what do you think of Soham? The answer should be, oh, he's great to work with. And he really helps me and all this. And if you need to have created that relationship with the people who you hope to manage. And your goal should be to get 3 people or so, 4 people who are related to your project that you're already leading technically to be your report. And by the way, as a manager, if your manager is managing 12, 15 ICs, they would be so happy if they felt that you could step up and lead those people and take over the people management for those people. So they want to do this. It's hard to manage 10, 12 people. So if you have the opportunity, if you have somebody who's interested and has potential and people relate to and like, they'll want to put you in that role. So that would be, I think, the most likely path to success for this person.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah. It's, and to Jan's point, I think analogically, I forget who had told me this, but it was quite right. Management is like Hogwarts, right? For ICs, you just don't know that it exists. Like it's like a completely different world. When you move from IC to manager and the kinds of things that you have to do, you never imagined that you would have to do as a muggle. Right? And so it's like a completely different world, like the calibration stuff, the motivating people, being a shit umbrella for the people you manage, playing the defensive politics that you have to play, like allocating resources across the team. Like some of those things are just completely hidden from the muggle world, like IC world for it. So to Yanni's point, I think folks, I'm not sure if you guys caught it, but like he said, be certain that you want to become one, right? It is not a cakewalk. And the other analogy I can give you is Hunger Games, right? You do not get to make excuses once you are into management. So as an IC, you can still make some excuse. As a manager, you can't make excuses. You're done. That is over. All right. Okay. Thank you, Yanni. I'll keep moving. So 1 second. I think this one has been answered. Can I directly get a job as engineering manager without having my current experience as engineering manager? Okay, so that has been answered. How much domain knowledge matters? Is it acceptable to lead teams in domains you are new to? That's an interesting one, Yanni. Like, would you hire somebody who comes from a completely different domain?
So yes, modulo the company you're interviewing with. So again, if you're interviewing with Google or Facebook and they're doing this committee hiring, you're by definition not necessarily going to end up leading a team that you have deep domain knowledge on. So that's already the general practice. For companies that tie you to a particular management position, they're more likely to value domain knowledge. But I'll use my own example, myself at Apple. I joined a Siri proactive team, which was basically an NLP, ML processing team. And I had zero experience in ML. And the reason why this role made sense and the person hired me was because they were looking for a very technical manager, and they were having this classic problem of the people who they liked from a management perspective simply didn't have the technical depth, and the people they liked from the technical depth did not seem ready to be managers. And this position was open for 9 months. And it was like, okay, he found me and he's like, look, okay, he doesn't know ML, but we have ICs who know ML, but this person shipped products before, this person's managed teams before. So they checks all the other boxes. So short answer is yes, depending on the company you choose, that might be the default. Like Google or Facebook is generally the default that they're not looking for deep domain expertise, especially in an L6, right?
Makes sense. Makes sense. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. That makes total sense. Are you guys going to be presenting curriculum first for EML? So Ravi, okay, at Interview Kickstart, there are a lot of managers who come in for preparation currently. We don't have a special manager course at the moment. We will be carving out one few months. But what our belief is that the best preparation for for engineering manager role at tier 1 company is like that of an IC. Right? You should be solid in your technical skills, both on the coding side and the design side, and then you need to get your stories straight like that of a manager. So Yanni is one of the management coaches on the platform, and if you are joining Interview Kickstart as a manager, right, you will obviously get good on the coding side, on the design side, and then you work with Yanni and coaches like Yanni, chiefly Yanni actually, where you would get your stories straight and get your leadership skills answers and those correct. So even today as is, you could join an IK as that, and we do the things that Yanni mentioned earlier. The curriculum is set in that way. And in a few months we'll carve out a specialized track, but it's going to be very similar to what we do today. Anyway, I hope that answers the question. Let me know.
This is Ryan. Just quickly, quick thing to add on that. So guys, if you are coming in to prepare from an engineering manager perspective, there are multiple things about the course that can also be customized, right, for you. So we allow you, for example, to take repeat classes, right, through the process. You could, for example, take more repeat classes and focus them more on system design, right? Because as an engineering manager, that might be something you want to focus on a bit more. Your LinkedIn profile, your resume, right? These are things like Soham said, you can customize by spending time with one of our career coaches, because the kind of things that a recruiter looks for in a engineering profile is going to be, as a managerial profile, is going to be slightly different. Also, from a mock interview perspective, right? You could try and schedule interviews with people who are already engineering managers or potential directors of engineering, right? But that being said, I do want to caveat this with what Soham said, that essentially the way we think about this process is that there is a core set of problem solving capabilities that one really needs to build up for any level of engineering interviews. And the course is centered around building up those chief problem solving capabilities, right? And also, as Soham said, in the next couple of months, we are likely to introduce a program that is more tailored, right? Let's say that that's a layer on top of the current cake, right? That's focused largely on the engineering manager. All right, thanks, Soham. I just wanted to add that quickly.
Of course. Thanks, Ryan. Yanni, this is an interesting one. If I work at a not so well-known company, I want to get into a FAANG company, like, is my chance better to get in as an IC or an EM? If I could go into either, which one should I try? This is actually a very good one.
Well, I would say that you should go for the one that you want to do, right? Because if you want to be a manager and you go in the IC track, it's a different ladder. So at places like Google and Facebook, they make it easy to transfer. And part of the reason why they do these committee interview processes is the idea is they're holding a global bar for a particular ladder for a particular level. So if you see a role that is the same ladder and level, you can simply go talk to that manager, and if they like you and you like them, you can just say, okay, I'm moving to that team. That's the idea, or one of the things that you get for this system. If you come in on the IC track, you need to be able to switch to the EM ladder. So it is not the sort of standard, I'm just switching teams. And same the other way around. If you're on the EM track, especially because they're hiring, even though they don't explicitly say it, that the technical bar is a bit lower, people won't trust that you can be the equivalent level IC on the IC ladder. So I would say you should do the thing you want to do, because number one, it's going to be hard to switch. Number two, you're probably not going to be as good at the other thing, right? If you kind of go into it where I'm going to be an IC for what, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and establish myself, and then I'm going to switch, and I'm going to spend that whole time thinking about how I'm going to switch, probably not going to work out great for you. Now, I think there's something embedded in there, which is interesting, which is how much does credentialing matter when you join a FAANG? And by credentialing, I mean like you have a company previously on your resume, like Apple or Microsoft or something. And I would say it helps when you get in the door. So it helps the recruiter pick you on LinkedIn. It helps the recruiter level you, right? Because they might say, well, I know what an engineering manager is at Google and what Google generally needs to do, but company schmo, I have no idea what it means to be an engineering manager there, so I'll be a little more conservative, and maybe instead of leveling them at an L6, I'll level them at an L5 with the possibility to stretch to an L6 if they do great on the loop. So credentialing does matter, but usually just to get in. And if you think of a company the size of Google or Facebook or Apple, they're recruiting thousands of people, right, a year. There's just no way that they could only recruit from Apple or Facebook or whatever. So they are bringing people in from other companies and perhaps less well-known companies and so on. So I think that there's probably a bit of a disadvantage of not having the credentialing, but it's not that high. So I would say get in by connecting with recruiters on LinkedIn, get in by getting referrals, and get on the ladder you want to be on for which you have experience and can make a credible case. And I think that would be your most successful route.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you, Yannis. This next one is also another very popular one, but I think it's more or less a debate. It's not a definitive answer. Is can manager skills be developed? Right. If I can practice coding, but what about management? Right? This is something that either is it like, are people born with it? Is it a skill that can be developed? What is the idea? What do you believe? I suppose, or what do you think? Is there a way to?
I think that there is some nature to it in the sense that certain personality types will do better in management, right? You need to be somebody who can be at least in part a consensus builder, right? You generally, the cartoonish version of management you see in movies where boss gets mad and tells you what to do, just number one, doesn't happen generally, but in tech companies where IC talent is so valuable, it's even less so, right? So a lot of those type of interpersonal skills, having a personality type that matches that will help you. So if you're introverted, it's harder to be a manager than if you're extroverted and so on. But a lot of the skills can be learned. A lot of the skills are presentation skills. In fact, one of the biggest pieces of feedback I tend to give in the behavioral interviews is, sounds simple, but you didn't answer my question. Like I'll ask a question like, tell me about the most interesting job you had, and somebody will just go off on like their latest job, or we implemented the lowest latency queue popping for SMS messaging in telcos, and it's like, okay, but what was interesting about that? Like, why do I care? Why do you care, right? So being able to look at your audience and think about what they're asking you and why they're asking you, and target your answer to what their question is very important. You would present a product differently to the VP of engineering than you would to the new intern that just joined from university, right? So these kind of skills can be learned: how to structure your response, how to read what's important to the other person. These are all things you can practice and do better at. So I think mostly management can be learned. I think the personality type that you are makes it either easier or more difficult to do the day-to-day job. And you got to like it. Like liking it is a prerequisite, because like you said, there's a lot of things that aren't so good. And there's actually things that are worse than what Soham was saying about, being a shit umbrella and this stuff. I mean, these are all, like, even though they're hard, they're positive things. Like, you're on your team and you're helping them. But think about things like you need to reorg your team, and some people are going to be out. Maybe they're either you have to lay them off, or maybe it's not so bad. Maybe it's simply that these roles just don't exist and they need to find some other role in the company, right? But that's still hard on somebody. Somebody's built their life around doing this thing or living in this area or so on. And what if you have a team that the whole business reason for it doesn't exist anymore? Like, these are all very difficult things to do. But the ways you can cope with them, the ways you can present them to people, the ways you can help your people grow and deal with change are all things you can learn. I mean, people learn to be psychiatrists and psychologists. People learn to be teachers, right? You can learn to be a better engineering leader and a better manager.
That is fascinating. That's a very fascinating comparison, Yanni. Yeah, a manager is like a part psychologist, part economist, right? Part like a cheerleader, right? And obviously part engineer as well. That's very interesting. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. The next one is interesting as well, Yanni. I'll break it into two parts. Do you see differences between companies in EM roles, like Google EM versus a Facebook EM versus an Apple EM versus Amazon EM, Microsoft EM? Like, is there like a big difference? Like, so does something stand out?
Yes, I would say there's definitely differences. I mean, they're substantial, and they're basically differences in culture. So if you look at somebody like Google, they have a very much bottom-up culture and a very much tech-driven culture, and you can see it in the products. Like, there's a reason why, like, Google Drive may have the coolest backend storage in the industry, but then doesn't work with like Gmail, right? Or these kind of things. And then you have like Apple, where it took them 3 years to get cut and paste on the original iPhone, but everything works together. And you get an Apple TV and you get an Apple phone, and you can send the URL from your Safari on your phone device to your TV, and you can see it on the screen. So these cultural differences permeate the organization. So like a Google manager may spend more of their time doing consensus building with their technical reports and technical reports in other parts of the organization, because so much of the outcome is based on sort of the organic bottom-up decision-making of the team. Someone like Microsoft, who has more of a GM model, where there's somebody who owns the product and owns all the functions of the product, like has dev, test, and PM reporting into them, well, they're decision makers, right? So when you're in a GM org, the way you manage is different, because you're much closer to the decision maker. So you have much better clarity in the direction you're going. And that means it's more about bringing the people below you and next to you along. When you're in a Google, it's really, you're not getting the clear direction, because it's all matrix. You go from your director to the VP to the SVP, and somewhere at Sindar's level, they figure out what the product is or something. And at that, I'm being a little facetious there, but And so you have less clear direction, and it's more about building the direction up. At an Apple, it's also matrixed, but it's heavily product driven. So while you have autonomy in engineering, it is very important that everything work together, which means it's a lot more, I would say, cross-functional than a Google. Facebook is very product driven. So even though it's organized similarly, there's a lot more deference to the product outcome versus the technical outcome, I believe. So are these large differences? I mean, they're not large differences in terms of the skill set you need to navigate the organization. So you still need to be able to bring people along. You need to be able to mentor people. You need to be able to deliver difficult news. You need to be able to, as you said, be a shit umbrella and figure out how you translate information coming from different layers. But the emphasis and sort of what your day-to-day is and how much control you have in this particular part of the organization will vary depending on the culture.
I see, and I know you have to go in a couple of minutes. Could you contrast this to a TLM position? Where does TLM sort of fit into the company, and And then from an interview perspective as well, like could you just get in as a TLM, for example? Right.
You can get in as a TLM. So just to make sure we're talking about the same thing here. So TLM, you mean technical lead manager. So people who manage on the IC ladder, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
So, and they're like poised to be an EM at some point, right? On this. So
well, not necessarily. No, again, it's a different ladder. So when you're on a career ladder, then the career path that is set up for you and the natural growth is up that ladder. There are no ladders where the natural growth is go find a different ladder, because then it would be on that ladder. I mean, the definition of the ladder is you move along it. So a TLM, somebody who's joining, let's say, as an L6 IC, who will have be a technical lead and then have people reporting to them, they'll be a TLM, they'll be a technical lead manager. But there is no, the next rung in the ladder is to go from, let's say, an L6 TLM to an L7. And the delta between L6 and L7 might be a few more reports, but it'll be mostly about the scope, the technical scope that person has, and the importance to the organization, right? Whereas if you're an L6 EM, you're going to have a certain number of people, and then the growth comes by managing managers, and by, you again have breadth, you have breadth through the reporting chain you have, and you might be a TL for like a larger area. So for example, myself, I'm the TL for graphics at Stadia, and there's other TLs below me, and some of them are TLMs, some of them people who manage, some of them are just technical leads. But the emphasis, the focus is on the people management.
Interesting, very interesting. Okay, awesome. Given that you worked at Bloomberg, do you have ideas on how the process at Citadel and Two Sigma and Jane Street and some of these high frequency trading firms goes? Like, is it the same as Google, Facebook, you think, or do you know firsthand? Or
so I don't know specifically. I do have a friend who worked at Two Sigma, but I guess I won't say something authoritative about any particular company's process. My observation from East Coast companies, I'll call them, technical companies that are based on the East Coast, seems much more based on credentialing and individual interview loops. So at Google, Facebook, the idea is to standardize. There's a lot of effort to remove bias. There's a lot of effort to get basically a homogeneous bar so that people can do things like move around the organization, and Google can have confidence in their hiring process. At these East Coast companies, I think there's a lot more individual team autonomy. So the interview you might get in one Bloomberg team might be totally different than another one. For example, there's no enforced homogeneity. And my observation is that there's less focus on sort of these stock questions, like make a hash table. And there's a lot more focus on your experience. There's a lot more conversation about it. That basically those companies seem to value credentialing more than the West Coast companies. West Coast has the meritocracy goal or illusion, or depending on your perspective, right? But there's a lot more focus on being objective in the feedback, and on the East Coast, it's a lot more about, hey, what have you done? Tell me more about what you did here, and a little bit more subjective.
Got it. Awesome, awesome. Thank you, Yanni. I think it's past 11. If you have to jump off, feel free to, as well. If you can stay, we'd love to answer a couple more. Either way,
actually, for me, it is 8 p.m. and dinner time, so I will be leaving. But it was great chatting with you, Soham, and it was great meeting everybody, all 236 people who are now on the call. And I hope I was able to answer some of your questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Yanni. Appreciate that. Folks, I'm happy to stick around for a few more minutes, and I will take some of the other questions as well. Though obviously I won't be able to take all 100, but I'll definitely get to maybe about 10 or so. Thank you.
All right.
Yanni.
Bye, Soham.
Bye. All right, folks, again, my name is Soham, one of the two founders of Interview Kickstart. I come from a technical background. I was at Box for quite some time. I was a director of engineering. I've hired managers in my life as well, obviously ICs and managers both. Let me take some of your questions, see if I can answer them. let's see. And we have taken, by the way, we have taken the most frequently asked questions here as judged by the upvotes, right, to this. All the questions which had 3 or more upvotes have been answered by Yanni. Let's see. Let's take some more. Can we actually progress to higher management levels via interviews? But I've seen that people, those levels you get hired via network of past references. So let's say generally it is rare to get hired at higher levels period. Like the most hiring is at L3, L4, and then L5, L6, there are fewer, L5 even fewer, L6 even fewer, L7 even fewer. So that is correct. Generally speaking, moving up in a company is as much a function of who you are as what the company is. And so you have to imbibe the company culture, the company stack, the previous decisions, the management buy-ins, all that, right? So most people who go up the ladders are usually people within the company. And so coming from outside, the percentage is actually quite small. Many of these people coming from outside are through acquisitions as well. So yes, your best bets are at 3, 4, 5 levels, sometimes 6 as well. Though, like Yanni said, you can't decide your level. Right? Recruiter has a lot of influence on what it is. The hiring committee obviously has a lot of influence on which level you are at. But typically it is true that generally you can't really just interview for an L8 position randomly like that. Like very few L8s get hired every year. I mean, you can, but like it's again, supply demand as well. It's much easier to get promoted as an L8. Like if you are in the company early, right, and then you get promoted up. I hope that answered it. L6 IC is level 6 individual contributor. It's just a senior IC, and Yanni talked about a couple of flavors of it as well, like somebody who actually can manage a few people, and call it TL, TLM as well. I hope that answers it. What does the transformation look like from a manager, senior manager to manager of managers? That's an interesting one. Just experience. If you are managing a group of engineers, right? Time goes and hopefully you manage them well, right? That people at a distance and people above you, you realize that you can manage a nugget of people. Then they give you 2 nuggets of people, right? When somebody leaves or there's an opportunity, right? They'll say, okay, John, manage these 2 now, right? Now you just sort of get into the boxing ring at that time, right? There's no like training for it. There's no transformation. It's an opportunity. You've done a good job in the past managing 1 team. Let's try 2 teams, right? If you have managed 1 team, it is unlikely that you're going to botch 2 teams, right, or more teams. You will. There is some bit of a learning curve, but the experience, the decision making required to manage 1 team, right, generally says that if you have done that fairly well, then you will be able to manage more. It's just a question of time. Right? You should have done full cycle management. Like you should have hired people, fired people. Right? You should have done reorgs. You should have motivated the team. You should have delivered stuff, and then I get enough confidence that okay, yeah, you can manage a group of people. Right? And then here is another one. It's just that. What about program management? So Shimash, we hopefully touch that in the call. Is there a minimum number you need to manage one role interview as a manager? We answered that. No magic number, Alyssa. What comes after being a manager for a few years in terms of your career? Where does your career lead into beyond the manager level? So generally, the idea is that you continue to grow into the company. Right? If you're good at this managing thing, right? If you can manage not only down but sideways and up, right? And you can suss the opportunities in the company, right? Then you just go into managing larger teams, right? Generally, the idea is that you become a part of a growing company, right? And you keep your eyes and ears open about where the growth is, right? Where there is a growth from the bottom, it will push you up. Right? So you continue to just rise in that ladder. Right? The other pathway after being management is to make a lateral move into a smaller company in a higher title. Right? You're a manager, senior manager at Google. You can go as a director at a smaller company. It is possible. And then you pull that company with your weight. Right? You pull that company up with your weight. That's the second career path. And then the third one really just is that you start your own thing. Right? So I hope that answers a little bit as well. I'd like to go in manager role, any tier company. Currently, I'm an IC, services company. Earlier moved from service product. Now I'm a management product company. What? So, I mean, the advice actually is not different from any other general advice that Yanni has given. Right? When somebody is looking at your role, at your candidacy in this, they are generally, if they give you an interview, you just have to ace the interview. That's it. Then your background matters a bit less. Right? You have to create your stories. You have to say your stories in a way which are impressive. Right? And that is one big thing that we do at Interview Kickstart, right? with people like Yanni as well. So whatever your background is, you have to figure out how it all threads together, how you can present it in a way that is actually impressive, right, and authentic. Right? And then it's fine. But the service company, product company matters less. It matters more in getting an interview versus like actually clearing an interview. Right? If you have been manager before, so do online management courses from HBS, Stanford help? No, MBAs and management courses, like when you're not a manager, very little. Like especially in the Valley, there is a phobia against management kind of courses for a management role. You can't replace experience with that. In fact, there is a running joke that when you go raise funding, if you have 3 people in your team and you raise funding and say, okay, I want, like, how do you ask for money when you have 3 people in your team and you are the CEO or the founder of the company and you go and raise money? You'd say 500K for every engineer and minus 500K for every MBA. Right? So, and I understand you're not talking about MBA, HBS or Stanford necessarily, but in general, you can't hope to take a course and then become a manager like that. You need some experience, certainly. With experience, yes, it just adds to it. When you are at a company, they send you for courses and all that. That adds to it, but otherwise not. Right? So I hope that answers some of that as well. Do managers make more money than ICs? And we addressed that as well. Generally not. Generally not. There is slight delta sometimes in terms of equities, but like usually not. Overall, no. Now there are companies where that is true. Like our perspective is good companies, right? Good companies, solid technical skills are valued the same as solid management skills. Right? What is the job ladder? Senior manager, director, senior director, VP is the same for test manager, the vertical, about the same, practically exactly the same. See, you realize that you will not be promoted in the management ladder if the company doesn't need you to go up, right? If the company is not growing, right, you will not be promoted, right? So just sitting at a place and managing a team of 5 people, you will not go from engineering manager to senior manager to director, right? The company has to grow and it needs more people to be hired. And then there is an opportunity to say, oh, you manage 2 teams and 3 teams, and now you're senior manager. Now you need bigger functions. Now you're director. The company is not growing, then there is no point, right? Then you will not grow despite whatever ladder, right, on this. Like they will not just hand you a new title and give you more money because they don't need more work from you, right? So, okay. How to answer the question? How do you manage an underperforming employee? Ankur, it's a loaded question. I'm happy. I mean, we do go into that in the course, but that's a question which does have some canned answers. Yes, to say how do you manage an underperforming employee. But it is also about how you say it, right, as well. I mean, the canned answers are pretty straightforward. One is that as a manager, somebody is underperforming, like you should know first, right? And you should tell them like the systems to actually figure that out well before it becomes a problem, right? That's the first step in your canned answer, right? And then how do you tell them? Right? You have to communicate that very clearly, sometimes with the help of HR. right? And then you have to give them enough opportunities, right? And then there is also discussion about understanding the person, right? They come from a different background and such. So there are different ways to think about that. But it's a pretty popular question. And there are good answers to that as well, and they are all along these lines. Figure out that this is happening, communicate properly, give them opportunities, and keep moving. Yeah. How important you would need management experience prior to considering for the party so much? Okay, we answered that. Interview L6, L7, Rani, we answered that as well. Let me know if not. What do tier 1 companies look for in manager in one-on-one interactions? Not sure I exactly understand. What do the tier 1 companies look for in the manager or one-on-one interaction? Is it in interviews or not in interviews? If it is in interviews, it's just interview, like Yannis said, coding, design, and soft skills. If you're talking about one-on-ones as a manager, once you go in, it's just how you're managing the team. Let me know. So if you're still here, feel free to clarify. What makes a good manager, Srinath? Again, it's a 3-hour question. There are lots of good things, lots of things that are required to be a good manager, but generally you just have to read people, right? You have to read people, and you have to choose the right words to communicate to people. Really, those 2 skills have to be nailed. After that, everything is based on the foundation of it. Right? If you can sense what might be going wrong, again, you will never be perfect, but if you can sense what's going wrong, and if you can actually communicate it properly, right, a lot of things. The rest is all just sort of scaffolding around it. Again, long question, good question. Should an engineer's career path end as a manager, or can they stay engineers? No, they can stay engineers, Ali. They can stay engineers. There are lots of engineers who never want to become managers. Lots of people who tried management and come back. Like Valley is very, very open to all that. So don't worry about it at all. Generally, company goes fast management track versus IC track. No, Ankur. It doesn't grow faster in management. Not necessarily. You only grow in the management track if the company needs you to grow. Okay. Otherwise, no. I mean, there is just compensation is a very different beast. Supply demand is one. How your interviews have gone, right, is the other thing. Like which area you are in, you sense and say, okay, Stadia is doing well, let me just go there, right? And Stadia is the focus of the company at this time. There's more money there. There's a lot of factors in compensation. That's not a black and white answer. And even IC is same thing as well. Generally, your compensation grows in proportion to your skills of growing your compensation, right? Whether it is not about management or IC. You get promoted faster when you latch on to a manager who gets promoted faster. So like that kind of politics, so to speak, some people call it politics. I think it's just natural. You to latch on to, like, then your compensation go much faster than debating IC versus not IC. Yeah. How does age make a difference in hiring an EM? I have not managed people by choice with. If you're not managed people, obviously there is no way to. It's pretty unlikely that you will get even an interview. But generally, once you get it, if you have managed people and you get an interview, then age is not that much of a factor. Like age might be a factor on IC side, but not a factor on the management side, actually. Much less. Obviously, interviews they will take a chance, and then interviews is where it becomes clear. 2 years ago, I moved from an Eng manager role to an IC role. Now I want to move back to EM role. How we plan, just like anything else. If you are an EM, then you go to IC, then you come back to EM. Just like anything else, just like a normal IC can go to EM, that's fine. It'll be easier for you because you will know what to answer. You understand this game. So, if you used to be a manager but moved to L6 role for a few years to understand the technical skills, how do you market yourself before even the interview begins? Then during the interview too, most of the times during the first pre-interview call, I says they need relevant experience in recent 2-3 years. So yes, sometimes that does happen. You have to go in with a recommendation or something like that. Right? When you see that is happening, that you have management experience, but your most recent experience is IC for several years, and the recruiter calls it out, you have to either influence it then, right there, or go with some sort of a recommendation. Otherwise, it's very difficult, right? Very difficult to really just get past the recruiter in that sense. Sometimes it does happen. Sometimes when you talk to, sometimes what happens is that your first call after the recruiter is with the hiring manager itself. In that case, you can tell them this is what you're looking for. So if an opportunity exists, they will move you. But there is no rubric that exists inside companies to say if this is the case, then do that. Generally recruiters don't understand all this, and so they will just go by the book, right? To say, oh, last few years not there, previous not sure what is happening, and so I will not consider it, right? And then, but you have to influence it, right? Other typical behavioral questions. Karthik, it's a long question. Let me go to another one as well. But like generally, they're all around how do you manage teams? How do you motivate people? How do you reduce a tech debt? How do you sense the changes required? Right? All just things like that, like for managers. Do people generate themselves high in leadership qualities? It doesn't really matter really how they rate themselves in leadership qualities. Interview tells the story one way or another, right? It's really the point. So interviews are where rubber meets the road, right? Anybody could rate whatever they want to rate themselves in the leadership qualities, but the answers to the questions in leadership qualities just tell me exactly what they're looking for. For example, if they're applying for a senior manager role and they have never fired a person, I'll tell you that one, they are lying, and whatever did what they call themselves in leadership is not going to matter, right? And so and there are obviously cases on the other side as well. Why someone want to join lower role even with same comp? Because you may not be coming from a very well-known company. It's possible, and you want to join at a well-known company, right? And there are many reasons why people do that, right? Why would you ever take a lower role with the same comp? There are many reasons, and different stages of your career you make different choices, right? So the biggest one is that you're not coming from a very well-known company. When you want to grow, you join a growing company, right? Where you see that in the next 2 years you'll grow faster here versus there, right? So that's generally why people do it. How about switching from consulting to engineering? Again, if you've never managed people, right, like just a title is not the point. The point is, if you have managed people, then whether it is a consulting role or not doesn't really matter, right? If you've not managed people, then the title doesn't matter. So that's generally the gist of it in a nutshell. I've seen TPM become senior software manager at Google, Amazon. So Amazon more Ankur than Google, yes. Amazon cares less in the interview process. They care more after you join. Right? The culture is more cutthroat than it is at Google, and culture weeds people out, right, for it. So as long as you are in the ballpark, they will give you an offer and you can move. Right? After that, you have to survive. That's the point. Google, I've seen less transitions like that. Generally what happens is that if you have a reputation as a very technical TPM, right, then that happens. If you have a reputation of if you have experience managing people before, right, and reputation of actually dealing with people very well, then some of those things can happen as well. Best way to grow from EM, managing large teams, to senior EM. Join a growing company. That's the best way. You want to grow in the management ladder, join a growing company. If you're joining if you're not in a growing company, like, you will not grow whatever the hell you want, right? The company will not promote you. You have to go into areas which are growing. That's the best. For a tier 3 and 4 companies, handling low performance resources is totally different from tier 1 and 2. What is the answers I expected from tier? So first of all, don't call them resources. The moment you call resources, you're not going to get even an interview. If you put that on the resume, you're not going to get an interview. People are not resources. That is a very service tier company lingo. So make sure you don't do that. Otherwise we have to dive into sort of where you are coming from, what sort of performance management is there, and such. And so very difficult to tell without details. But generally speaking, you can always tell a story properly. If you managed several people, right, and you had to let somebody go, whether you are in a service company, tier 3, 4 company or so, it is not an easy task. And somebody trusted you to do that, and you did that well. So there has to be a way to tell that story properly. Right? You can't start with that and say, oh, this is not a story they will like. You have to make a story that they will like out of that same circumstance. That's a skill, that's an art that comes with coaching. Right? Yes. Okay. Folks, I'll go for 5 more minutes. Obviously, the questions have been just coming in and in and in. And I highly appreciate you guys asking questions. I don't think I'll be able to survive answering that many, but I will take some more, certainly. For a company, what is the trade-off between transitioning someone from inside versus hiring someone from outside? There is no trade-off, Anand. If I can promote from within, I will promote from within. Right? There is no humanly possible reason why I would bring somebody from outside. So I will only bring somebody from outside if I can't promote from within. Promoting from within is a super motivator, right? And not only to that person, but to everybody else. Right? Everybody else feels like they will become manager someday. Right? That's a very big task. It's a very big act of motivation. And your biggest problem as an engineering manager is motivation. So if there is somebody from inside, they will get promoted, whatever you are from outside. Obviously, there are exceptions, but rare exceptions. Right? If you're growing really fast, you just can't find people inside, right? And that's how that would happen. Do you have any must-read book recommendations for managers? No, just throw yourself into the ring. Throw yourself into the ring and just manage more. Right? Do coaching. There's no book recommendation. If you want to do anything, you could read something called Crucial Conversations. There's another one called Difficult Conversations as well. Those are the two books, because a lot of this is about conversations, right? The things that you'd hated as an IC, where you called them people just talk, right? That's what you have to do now, right? As a manager, and that's a very important thing. So read Difficult Conversations or Crucial Conversations, right, as well. Okay. All right. Good questions. Do FAANG companies automatically down level from, for example, L6 to L5 and targeting from level 2? Generally, yes. If you're coming from a non-equivalent company, you will be down leveled, right? In that sense. Yes, that is typically true. Do you have any discount offer alumni who likes to retake the IK session? Okay, slightly misplaced, I suppose, but just reach out to Yes, we do. Just reach out to start at Interview Kickstart and somebody will get back to you. All right. The email address is start@interviewkickstart.com. Yeah. Does MBA hold any value? We discussed that. Not very much. Once you are a manager, then you can do an MBA. You will get a better understanding of the business. Okay. But to break into an EM PM role, much less. Right? Not in tier 1 places. Who get more visibility in organization? It depends on the organization culture, like Yanni answered before. Right? I'll keep moving. You and IC want to move to EM. What is a good reason to move to EM? The biggest good reason to move to EM is really you just want to magnify your impact. Right? You manage a team of 5-10 people. As a group, what you can pull off, you will never be able to pull off as a single person. Right? That is the right reason to be an engineering manager, right? And you want the people under you to have solid careers, right? And you want to take care of them. Those are the yep. That's the idea. Can I connect anyone from ICA to get more detail about EM track? I need more detail. Yes, I reach out to start at interview Kickstart. Certainly. Thanks for saying. Could you throw light EM versus TPM? Yeah, and it did that. I hope that helped. How to transition from an IC role to EM role for prep? We discussed that as well. Any speak tips on applying for EM roles after being as? Do you need to have EM experience? Yes, we discussed that. What does a EM do exactly? Ali, we discussed that as well. They manage the team. They get things delivered. Right? There's a charter that comes from above that this is the area you're responsible for. But these are the OKRs for the next few years, next few weeks and months and quarters. Motivate the team, like select the right team, and then get going. Staff of as EM at a small non-FAANG company for a few years versus GPM at FAANG and growing into EM. Which one to pick? Staff offer as EM at a small non-FAANG company for a few years versus TPM FAANG company growing internally to EM. If you have a TPM offer at a FAANG company and you feel like you can grow internally as to EM, you should take that. Not the staff offer. I think being at FAANG is a completely different experience. It gives you far more career satisfaction than not. Kinds of problems that you will solve, kinds of teams that you will work with, the kind of challenges that you will be put into is very different. I would prioritize FAANG over non-FAANG practically any day. All right, folks. I think that's the end of my patience. Honestly, I really appreciate you asking questions. That is what I love. But unfortunately, I can't get to all of them today. Feel free to reach out to us. Start at interview Kickstart if you need any help on any side of this, and feel free to attend the enrollment workshop also that we do like 3 or 4 times a week as well. So and we discuss a lot of this in the course as well. A lot of these questions get answered in the program, in the career coaching sessions, like there are everyday sessions as well. So awesome. Thank you again for your interest. Don't not ask questions in the next seminar or next webinar or the next session. The only question that is stupid is the one not asked. Right? So feel free to continue to ask, and then we'll continue to answer as much as we can to the best of our ability, time, and energies. Thank you.